Well, hello, class. My name is Andre Mosley, and I am the guest lecturer for your professor this morning. And today I would like to lecture on Comms 4 or Communication Studies 4, which is formerly known as the Introduction to Public Speaking. And so oftentimes when we think about public speaking, there's a few things that come to our minds, but public speaking oftentimes go under different different sayings or different wordings, but they all mean the same thing. So public speaking also can be looked at as speech or speech communications. Also look at it as oral presentations, oral communications. But mostly the academic community sees public speaking as rhetoric, which is the art of persuasion through speech and writing. So it can be looked at as all of those things. So I'm really excited about this lecture today. One of the things that inspired me to teach public speaking is simply because I feel like it is the only thing in college that I excelled in. And so it was the class that I had the most control over. I would go in there and I would be able to do my own research, talk about a current event that I was passionate about, and I was able to present it to the class. And I would get a lot of feedback, if you may, even before I even got the grade. Students would come up and that we would have a conversation. Some of it was good, some of it was not so good. So that was just one of the things that inspired me to want to teach public speaking. So today's lecture will not necessarily be on how to present or even what to present, but more so what makes a speech an effective speech. And I think when we look throughout history, there are certain speeches that stick out in our minds, and I'll just pick the easiest one, which is usually oftentimes at the top when you Google or you look up, the best speech in the world, which is Martin Luther King's "I Have a Dream" speech. And there were a lot of things in there that made that speech great. I mean, we can pick out any quote. We can look at President JFK, John Fitzgerald Kennedy, and that speech where he said, "Ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country." Or we can look at President FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, when he said, "The only thing we have to fear is fear itself." Those are sayings that just stick out in our mind, and you don't even have to be a communications major, and you just know those speeches. But there was something that Dr. King, JFK, and FDR all had in common, and that is what I want to talk to you today. What makes a speech effective? So if we look throughout the history, believe it or not, speech actually does have a history. There was a very influential orator named Marcus Tullius Cicero, and he was one of the most influential figures in the history of rhetoric. And he was born in 106 BCE near Rome. In Cicero, he wrote two books. They were entitled De Re Republica and De Orator. And these two books were extremely influential, and you can pretty much credit him on why we more so understand speech and delivery. And there were 5 components that he talked about in a speech, and he called them the 5 canons of rhetoric. And he concluded that this is what makes a speech effective. When you add these 5 components, this is what makes a very effective speech. And one can argue this is what FDR and Dr. King and JFK all had in common, is that they were able to add these 5 components to their speeches, and which ultimately made it great. So the first component is invention. An invention is the first canon of rhetoric in which you choose the best possible arguments for your case. So this is really like the creative dimension uh, part of your speech. You're trying to pick the best argument. This is where you can be really creative, uh, depending on what audience you're speaking to, depending on what age group. This is the time to pick the best argument because you want your speech to get across. You want it to be persuasive, whether you're talking about something everybody agrees with or something that don't agree with, and you're trying to persuade them to see your view. You want to pick the best arguments. What is going to get them to go, huh? Or what's going to provoke them or prick their imagination. The second, the second canon of rhetoric is arrangement, and this is where you determine the most effective way to organize your case for the topic and the audience. So there's like an unwritten rule. No, actually, it is written in speech communications where they say you want your strongest, your strongest argument to be made first or last. You never want to pick your strongest argument in the middle. It's just something about that. And then they also say in certain books that I read that 3 arguments are the best. 3 arguments. You have one argument. Like I said, the strongest argument can be at the intro or it can be at the climax, at the conclusion, but never in the middle. But they usually stick with 3 strong arguments and you hit on them. And people do have attention spans, so you want to always keep the time into consideration. The third canon of rhetoric is style, which involves word choice, phrasing, and the level of formality in the language you use to present your case to the audience. And this is where we go back to Dr. King, FDR. There was a certain way that they presented the information that made them stick out. There were certain words he could have just said. FDR could have just said, we shouldn't fear anything. But no, the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. Nameless, unreasoning, unjustified. Okay, that's beside the point. But yeah, it's all about word choice. Instead of saying, oh, he. Give a good example. I kind of drew a blank. But you wanna pick. Let's just say if you're making a persuasive speech, you want to pick the word that's probably going to get their attention. So, if you're talking about something that's drastic, you're not going to use light words. You may use some words that are going to be alarming and some words that may cause some type of emotion, but nevertheless you want to draw that because in certain books it says, or in persuasion books it says that drawing those type of emotions are very persuasive. The fourth canon of rhetoric is memory, which refers to one's ability to recall names and important information in the middle of a speech, as well as to deliver a speech without notes. And this is actually, depending on how you process information and even your own memory, this can be probably the most challenging canon of rhetoric, but this also requires a lot of time. It requires a lot of practice. And you want it to be something natural. You never want it to be something that maybe you're not interested in, because if and when you forget your point, you can go back to it. You can refer back to what you already know. But there was actually a very influential orator named Demosthenes, and he used to make his cases. And one of the things, he had this beautiful speaking style, but his opponent would debate with notes, and they would go through all these different arguments, and his eloquence was just simply on memory. And they said that some of the most eloquent speakers are the ones who don't use any notes, and that's also another way to connect with the audience. You want to study beforehand, but just know what you talk. You're not so tied to your notes. You are able to divorce yourself from your notes so you can be a more effective speaker, connect with your audience. You seem more personable. You seem like you're able to relate to them. And also, eye contact is extremely persuasive. Um, so, yes, if you have enough time to study your speech and memorize it, but you want it to sound fluent. You want it to flow. You don't want it to sound like a robot. Like, hello, my name is Andre, and They know you're reading, but that's why you practice. You may even work on different pauses, voice fluctuations, but nevertheless, you're not tied to your notes. And the last canon of rhetoric, which is the fifth canon of rhetoric, is the manner in which you physically and vocally present the speech. And, anybody can write a speech, but the question is, can you deliver it? And that is one of the things which I refer back to Dr. King, JFK, and FDR, is they had the ability to deliver a speech. You can put those speeches in front of anybody, but you can learn that gift of delivery, but it takes practice, it takes time. But this is where, really gifted orators are able to take. President Obama is one, able to take a document, a piece of information, an artifact, and be able to bring out words and phrases and ideas that you said, I never heard it that way before, until this person presented it that way. And this oftentimes take a lot of practice. Now they have this thing called the natural, but it takes a lot of practice. It's best to study, and it's best to more so know what you're talking about, because if you know what you're talking about, and even also another point, having something that you're passionate about, because if you're not passionate about something, then the delivery, you may not be as strong or as forceful or as emotional. You may just, if it's something that you're presenting that you really don't agree with, and you're not a natural, as they call it, then it may show. But practice, like I said, being passionate about what you're delivering, and their specific components that add to that will make a speech effective. You want to deliver it. You can have the greatest writers in the world, but there's a certain way in which you have to deliver the speech, and this is all about voice fluctuations, when to pause, when to speak up. If there's a striking statistic, if it's 85% of young black men are put into jail, whatever striking statistic, you might want to change your voice. You may want to pause at that moment. 85% of young black men are killed, whatever. But you want to change your voice when you're talking, because you want to give them the lecture. You want them to feel what you're feeling. You want them to meditate on that number, because it's a striking number. Maybe you said 85% of black men, that idea is missed, and that's why delivery is so important. And it takes practice. But those are the 5 canons of rhetoric. I hope you have a great semester, and yes, have a good day. Take care.